Welcome into another edition of Carps Corner. I know it's been a while since put something out. Had a lot going on last week. A lot of stuff happened. Things were fast and furious with the Big Ten, Baker Mayfield's trade. You know, you come in, you had Wimbledon this week, which I know isn't really a big topic of conversation for the general sports landscape. You know, as far as what was going to happen, you had the Stanley Cup. It was ultimately polished off about a week and a half ago. So wanted to, make some comments, not necessarily on hockey, but on maybe best trophies in sports. So, and then as well, like I said, where we're going out with the Big Ten. And so that's what we're ultimately going to start right here, trying to figure this thing out. A lot of movement, a lot of projections, a lot of things I speculated on. Who is going to ultimately join the Big Ten? You had Washington, you have Oregon sitting out there. Could it be a Stanford, Notre Dame? And it looked like there was so much momentum for this happening. The Pac-12 is scrambling, Big 12 trying to gobble them up. The SEC bringing in teams from the ACC and looking at this holistically, trying to figure out, does it all make sense? How is it all going to shake down? And this is typically what's happened with college football expansion, conference realignment rather, is one or two dominoes fall, and we expect there to be a flurry of dominoes that'll all fall like quick, fast, and in a hurry. And it looks like it's going to be that way. But then all of a sudden, usually the brakes kind of hit a little bit. People reassess. They realize they're not in as bad a situation as they once originally thought. It's not as tumultuous as it could potentially be. And there may be a pathway to stability with where they currently are. And I think that that's kind of where we're at a little bit now with conference realignment. I don't think the SEC is going to do anything rash. I don't think the Big Ten is going to do anything rash. I think they're sitting there kind of waiting. I think everybody's kind of waiting on the Big Ten to see what happens, obviously, with Notre Dame. And so, I'm going to throw this up here. It's comments about Gene Smith, who athletic director at Ohio State. And Gene Smith is an alum, played football at Notre Dame. And so he is tied into that school. He understands the tradition. He understands everything that ultimately goes in it. And, Gene came out, you can read it, said, I always felt like they should be in a conference. And that's probably AD Gene Smith talking. And, maybe a little bit of, Gene Smith from the player kind of looking around saying, hey, could this have been better for players if we would have been in a conference, yada, yada, yada. Notre Dame wants to be a national brand. Let's listen to Brady Quinn talk Sunday night, talking on Fox about being a national brand and what that means to Notre Dame and how the Big Ten ultimately gives them that. But they don't have to make a decision right now because they have until the 2025 season with their NBC deal. And so that's a little bit of what they're going to have to figure out is what's the timeline on this. The Big Ten could really push chips into the middle and say, hey, USC, you're not playing them after, once you join in. Big Ten schools currently comprised, you're not playing Notre Dame. And they could try to leverage and back them into a corner. I don't think they want to do that because I think they obviously look around at Notre Dame and realize the most natural and best fit for them, especially now with bringing in some of their West Coast rivals, is going to be the Big Ten as far as what you're trying to accomplish academically, the sports platter that you're able to offer from a wide variety of sports. And you give them that national footprint, but also that Midwest presence. So it checks a lot of different boxes from that standpoint. So I believe that it ultimately happens. I don't know if it'll happen, what we would say, kind of quote, this cycle. I think there's a chance that this could kind of pause, hold off a little bit, and could be negotiated as such. And this is the one thing people need to remember. Everyone's like, well, the Big Ten's redoing their deal right now. They are redoing their deal right now if their TV media rights. They know they have USC and UCLA in the fold. They know the markets that gives. Fox could do something similar to what ESPN did and say, okay, if you bring in teams X, Y, Z, A, B, C, whatever it might be, we will, instead of just divvying up your shares, we will add you a whole nother share in for one of those teams. That's essentially what the SEC negotiated with ESPN, with Texas, Oklahoma. I believe USC was on that list too, Notre Dame. They were the big, powerful brands. The schools that you would expect were on that list. So I think that they could do something like that with Fox. They could wait. They could see ultimately what happens, see if there's anybody from the ACC that would be able to become calling, anyone that would be interested for overtures there that they could maybe look in. And so as we look at this, we all think that, hey, this stuff's going to happen and it's going to happen right now. Maybe it does. Maybe it happens before the season. Maybe it happens this time next year. But I think at some point in time in the next 2 years, you got 2022, the rest of this, 2023, as we head into 2024, I feel like this will start to be kind of firmed up. And the bigger issue is what's going to be done with really the Pac-12 and the Big 12. And, you know, the overtures there, because they've got to figure that out. And whether Oregon or Washington are going to leave or not, you know, that's an element that they'll have to figure out. If you keep them there, I don't think the Pac-12 maybe has to do a whole lot. Maybe you could add in a Boise, possibly a Fresno, you know, something like that. You know, throw some schools in there that make a little bit of sense to kind of bolster it back up, get it back to 12, and, you know, try to give it that sense of oomph that maybe you would like to have. San Diego State, I don't know who potentially be off to kind of screw it on that. But the problem is they have to think, is that a better scenario for us than if the 2 AZ schools leave, Colorado, Utah, Washington, Oregon, if they somehow seed over and merge with what's going to be the Big 12 that's adding in a BYU that would fit really well with Utah. You know, you've got Cincinnati coming in, Central Florida, giving you that East Coast presence, in Houston, another big market. That might be pretty appealing for media rights, and it should be a pretty competitive conference. I mean, that essentially destroys the Pac-12, but you feel like that might ultimately be the case. And then there's like this other avenue that people are beginning to talk about now where, hey, we don't necessarily have to be a conference together. Maybe we can just kind of pool on our media rights as far as the negotiations and make sure that we're going to have so many games being played, kind of what the alliance was supposed to be, so many games being played between member institutions. And how does that look as far as increasing our desirability for a media outlook? But a lot of stuff is ultimately changing and moving around. And then the last piece of it, the SEC, you know, who do they want? Do they go after the 2 Florida schools they don't have in Miami and Florida State? Do they try to go after a Clemson? You know, is there anyone else that is potentially interesting in there? A North Carolina, but is North Carolina, they want to have reciprocity with that? Would they reciprocate, you know, that overture? But it really got me thinking. You know, and I'm glad that we're going to ultimately play some of those rivalry games still, because that's what people love. And as I sit here and I, you know, do off campus with Jacob Hester, and I do my local show in Columbus, Ohio, Morning Juice, and you know, the things that we talk about is the more I get into this, I'm like, I understand why this is happening. I think it's great for Ohio State. It's great for the Big Ten, but I don't necessarily love it for college football. And as I sit there with Hess and we're talking, like, the thing that you love, we had callers that have called in and talked about this. The thing that you love is that generationality where you can sit there and talk to your mom and dad, talk to your aunts and uncles, talk to your grandparents, your great uncles about games that were played, you know, between Ohio State and Michigan, between Bama and Auburn, between Tennessee and LSU, between USC and UCLA, or Cal Stanford, or Notre Dame Miami, Florida State Miami, all of these classic games that I remember watching and like hearing about as kids. And there's a chance when I got to ultimately play in some of those games, like that Ohio State Michigan game, knowing what that meant, knowing all the people that had worn those colors before, worn those uniforms, and talking to Jacob Hester and understanding, like, dude, especially when you're in state, and maybe some of the national recruiting has diminished this a little bit, and it's up to the coaches to really indoctrinate everybody to understand that they appreciate the culture and everything that exists at these schools and with these rivalries. But that's what makes it so great. It was understanding the guys that played there 15, 20 years before that you watched play, or your grandparents watched play. And like, you're now a part of that. And it's something that's bigger than you. And that's why we love college sports more than the professional level. But the generationality, the emotional attachment and connection that cannot be replicated anywhere else. And so as we expand conferences and realign and do all these different things and negotiate for TV and media rights, I get it all. I understand all that. And I know why it's there. And I may sound like an old man sitting on my soapbox, shaking my hand at the sky. I understand that it's happening. I'm not trying to prevent it. But what I do know is how much I appreciated knowing the guys that Paul Warfield wore 42 before me at Ohio State, like a long time ago, and listen to my dad talk about him. He wasn't even really an Ohio State fan, but how good he was. And, and like listening to some of the different guys, and Tress would put stuff in our locker of all the guys who had worn our jerseys and the stuff that they had accomplished. Like at Ohio State, 36 is a big time linebacker number. All the guys that have worn it there, number 7 is another big time number. Like to be able to get to wear that means that you've done something. You're big time, no different than receivers at Michigan wearing number 1, like how important and iconic that ultimately is. And so you have all these things tied in together, and how just elite and elusive they ultimately are of trying to like catch that and understanding what it means. And that's why we love college sports, the generationality. And I might be making that word up, but to know that I can talk to my kids and I introduce them to Andy Katzenmoor and Joey Galloway, or show them Coach Fickle on the sideline, or when I get a chance to meet Troy Smith and have them come around him, like this was my quarterback. And so he rocked the number 10, just like Rex Kern rocked the number 10, who won a national championship with the Bucs in '68, who's from my hometown, like all of those things. And I know it's an Ohio State centric view of it, but it exists at every little pod. It exists at every campus. It exists within every fan base. And it's just something that as we continue to expand, you're going to hear me touch on this more and more. Like I'm not going to just let it die, because it stirs something inside of me. That as excited as I get, and I look at the schedule and I see all the money that's coming in, and now it's being directed to the players. And I think that's ultimately a great thing. And we've got these beautiful facilities, great food, all these elite opportunities, things that, my dad could never have dreamed of, that I looked at and that, man, that'd be great. And now all of a sudden it's all there, and it's there for those guys, and they deserve it. And they really do. They deserve it. I'm not going to sit here and say that they don't. I think that's awesome. But is it really worth it to gain the world but lose your soul? And that's something we always have to ask ourselves, is in our quest for success in life. If you could have everything you ultimately ever wanted, is it worth it to get it if you don't have what constitutes you as a person and what makes you you and makes you tick? Like that's big. I know it's kind of deep, but that's like, sports are really what has always connected my family. As I talked about on Father's Day, people ask me, what do you and your dad talk about outside of sports? Talk about our family, talk about my kids playing sports, talk about his sports stories, my sports stories, my brothers, all that stuff. Hunting, maybe a little bit, but we don't really do a whole lot like hobbies. Sports are our hobby. It's our family deal. It's our family business. And so I love it. I think the realignment monetarily is going to be very beneficial. I think it's going to be great. But I do think it ultimately comes at a cost. But to gain the world and lose your soul, always kind of remember what that means and how that can kind of hit you from time to time. All right. Don't have a ton of time today, but one other big thing that I do want to get to that came down last week, and this was the wild speculation that I've been kind of tracking for a long time. Baker Mayfield finally traded from the Cleveland Browns. And we'll throw this up here. Their statement: Baker Mayfield infused our organization with tenacity and grit during his time as our starting quarterback. Baker's competitiveness, toughness, and ability to persevere were characteristics that endeared him to our city as well as to his teammates. He will always have a unique place in Browns history for what he accomplished, and we wish him well as he continues his career. End quote. From Andrew Berry, general manager of the Cleveland Browns. All those things were true to what he was able to do. Beat Pittsburgh twice back-to-back, won a playoff game, had him close on the doorstep of going to the AFC Championship against Pat Mahomes. They were right there. Played for a ton of offensive coordinators, a ton of coaches. Baker's toughness, tenacity, his attitude, like it's great when things are going well, and he's a guy you want to follow. I think things got a little awry and the trust kind of dissipated, but he gets traded to the Panthers, 5th-round pick, conditional, can go up to a 4th if he plays 70% of the snaps for the Panthers. Ironically, he'll be competing with the guy who went, I believe, 4th overall in his class, was Sam Darnold. And so both those guys now on their second team. Browns paying like over $10 million of his salary. You look at the Panthers, they're paying close to $5 million. And then Baker took a $3 million haircut. It means he really wanted out. He wants to stick around to see what was going on with Deshaun Watson, thinking maybe we can mend fences. Maybe I could somehow play if Deshaun's suspended for 12 games or a whole season or whatever it is. And I can come in and kind of be the hero, get a great season of film with a really good roster, and hopefully be able to get traded after this year into a much better situation, or I'll be a free agent, just be able to walk and pick my spot. So those were his options, but he took a $3 million haircut that can be made back with incentives. So I get that. They've got Matt Corral there. So we going against Sam Darnold. And ironically, him and Sam Darnold, since coming into the league, 56 and 52 interceptions since they entered the NFL. That is first and second, I believe. So very, very generous with the football, liking to share it around a lot. The problem is maybe sharing it with some of the opposition as opposed to their teams. And we get a little nugget here too as fans. The Browns will be in Carolina week 1. So I doubt that's going to be Deshaun Watson playing. It'll be Jacoby Brissett most likely against Baker Mayfield and his former team. I mean, Baker loves grinding axes. I mean, he is a guy that has a chip on his shoulder as big as a Grand Canyon. He's going to sit there and hold it, and he's going to own it. I'm happy for Baker. He's finally able to go to a spot that I think Matt Rule, they'll be able to utilize his ability. And I think Baker will prove that he's a top 20 quarterback in this league, maybe top 15. Somewhere probably between 12 and 20, we'll see Baker this year, maybe even 10 and 18, like somewhere in there. You're like, okay, this guy can do some things. They can stay healthy. And I hope that this resurrects his career. And I hope that he's able to do it and to be able to have the success, because he showed flashes and he showed at points in times he can be really good and people like to follow him. He's a guy that is worth following. And so I know that this came out, last week. I've had a chance to really dive into it and discuss it really, but I enjoyed Baker Mayfield. Everyone in Buckeye Nation got upset about the flag plant at midfield. Hey, my response to that is always win the game. You win the game, you don't have to worry about it. But he's a competitive SOB. And I think he did some good things. He helped get the Cleveland Browns. He did a lot of like what Matt Stafford did. Stafford did it in Detroit for a decade. But he eliminated the ability for the Lions to be a laughingstock. And I think Baker in Cleveland, in conjunction and in concert with the moves that they made at the top and everything else, the Cleveland Browns were no longer a laughingstock. They had stability at quarterback for a while. And I know last year, while he was beat up and while he was hurt, and maybe wasn't the best, but you knew you had a full day's work with him. And it's great when a down season in Cleveland can be 8-9. That's when you know that expectations are where they should be. And so Baker Mayfield helped get them there. And that's a big piece of it. So thank you, folks. We got over 1,000 subscribers now. We're continuing to cruise this thing on, continue to push it out to folks, like, subscribe, share it. I appreciate all of it. I'm going to get you another one. We'll get back on a regular schedule because, man, it is the middle of July and training camp's in about 2 weeks. So I'm starting to get cold sweats at night, but I don't have to report. So that's a good thing. And we'll talk to you soon.